The doctor's words still rang in Lydia Harper's ears as she stood on the platform, her single carpetbag clutched in trembling hands. Barren, defective, worthless. The man who'd paid for her passage had returned her like spoiled goods, the marriage annulled before the ink dried on the certificate. 23 years old, alone in the New Mexico territory with $3.50 to her name, wearing shame like a second skin. But what that cowboy would say months later, that children were never why he wanted her, would change everything. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small depot at Socorro Station, turning the wooden platform into a griddle that seemed to shimmer with heat and humiliation. Lydia Harper stood perfectly still, her dark blue traveling dress already dusty from the journey, her hands gripping the worn leather handle of her carpetbag so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Behind her, the train that had carried her from Silver Springs was already pulling away, black smoke billowing into the cloudless sky like a final farewell to any hope she'd carried with her. She was alone, completely, utterly alone. The other passengers had dispersed quickly, ranchers collecting supplies, a family reunion taking place with tears and laughter near the station house, a businessman striding purposefully toward the town's main street. No one looked at her. No one approached. She might as well have been invisible, and perhaps that was a mercy. At least invisibility didn't come with the pitying stares or whispered judgments. 3 days ago, she'd been a mail-order bride, full of cautious optimism, despite the circumstances that had driven her to such desperate measures. Her parents dead 2 years from influenza, her brother's widow making it clear there was no room for an extra mouth to feed, the teaching position she'd hoped for given to the superintendent's niece. Each closed door had led her finally to the matrimonial advertisements in the back of the Gazette. Respectable rancher seeks educated woman of good character for marriage. Must be of sound health and moral fiber. Children desired. Reply to Samuel Hartwick, Silver Springs, New Mexico territory. She'd replied with a carefully written letter, her penmanship perfect from years of education her father had insisted upon. Samuel Hartwick's response had been formal, but not unkind. He'd sent money for passage. She'd made the journey with her heart divided between hope and dread, telling herself that many marriages began with less. The wedding had taken place within 6 hours of her arrival. The annulment had been completed before their second sunrise as man and wife. "I need sons," Samuel had said, his face hard as the desert stone. "The doctor says you can't give me that. I paid good money for a wife who could give me children, not some barren woman who deceived me." "I didn't know," Lydia had whispered, the humiliation burning through her chest like wildfire. "I never—" "Doesn't matter what you knew or didn't know. The contract's broken. I'm sending you back." But there was nowhere to send her back to. Samuel hadn't cared about that detail. The doctor, a thin, nervous man named Dr. Pemberton, who'd examined her with clinical detachment and delivered his verdict with even less warmth, had at least shown a flicker of conscience. "I can write you a letter of reference for domestic work," he'd offered as she'd gathered the few belongings she'd unpacked. "You seem educated. Clean. That counts for something." It hadn't counted for much in Silver Springs. The town was small, insular, and Samuel Hartwick owned half of it. Word spread faster than cholera about the returned bride, the defective woman, the mail-order mistake. The hotel keeper's wife had literally crossed the street to avoid greeting her. The general store owner had sold her crackers and cheese with eyes averted, sliding her change across the counter as though her barrenness might be contagious. She'd lasted 4 days before using the last of her money for a train ticket to Socorro, 60 miles south, where perhaps no one would know her story, where perhaps she could simply be Lydia Harper, a woman looking for honest work, rather than Lydia Harper, the broken bride who couldn't fulfill her biological purpose. The station platform was emptying now. A clerk emerged from the depot office, glanced at her with mild curiosity, then went back inside. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of Socorro proper. Horses, wagons, voices carrying on the dry air. She needed to move. Standing here with her shame on display helped nothing. Lydia forced her fingers to loosen their death grip on the carpetbag handle. She drew in a long breath, tasting dust and creosote, and straightened her spine the way her mother had taught her. A lady stands tall, regardless of circumstance. Mama had always said. Well, Mama had never anticipated circumstances quite like these, but the principle seemed sound enough. The main street of Socorro stretched before her, a dusty ribbon lined with adobe buildings and wooden storefronts that seemed to waver in the heat. She could see a bank, a saloon, what looked like a mercantile, and, her heart lifted slightly, a sign that read, Mrs. Chen's boarding house hanging from a two-story structure with a wide front porch. She began walking, her boots raising small puffs of dust with each step. The carpet-bag wasn't heavy. It contained everything she owned in the world, which amounted to 3 dresses, 2 sets of undergarments, a nightgown, a hairbrush, her mother's Bible, and the small bundle of letters she'd exchanged with Samuel Hartwick. She should have burned those letters, but some masochistic part of her had kept them, perhaps as evidence that she'd tried, that she'd done her best with the impossible hand life had dealt her. The boarding house was her first priority. Lodging, then work. The $3.50 in her reticule would cover perhaps 2 nights of room and board if she was frugal. After that, she needed income or she'd be sleeping in the street. The thought sent a chill through her despite the oppressive heat. A woman stood on the boarding house porch, sweeping with vigorous strokes that suggested either excessive energy or suppressed anger. She was small, Chinese, perhaps 50 years old, with silver threading through the black hair she wore in a practical bun. Her dark eyes were sharp as she looked up at Lydia's approach. "You need room?" she asked, her English accented but clear. "Yes, ma'am," Lydia said, climbing the porch steps. "If you have one available, just for a night or 2 while I seek employment." Mrs. Chen's sweeping paused. Those sharp eyes traveled over Lydia with an assessment that felt thorough but not unkind. "You run from something or to something?" The directness of the question caught Lydia off guard. She could lie. Probably should lie. But something in the woman's weathered face suggested she'd heard every lie and half-truth the world had to offer and wouldn't be fooled by another. "From something," Lydia admitted quietly, "but hoping to find something better here." Mrs. Chen nodded as if this made perfect sense. 50 cents a night. Includes breakfast and supper. No men in rooms, no drinking, no loud noise after 9 o'clock. Laundry costs extra. "That's very reasonable, thank you." "You pay first." Mrs. Chen held out a work-roughened hand. Lydia opened her reticule and carefully counted out $1, 2 nights, which would give her tomorrow to find work. Mrs. Chen pocketed the coins and gestured toward the door. "Room 4, top of stairs on left. Supper at 6. You late? You go hungry." The room was small but scrupulously clean. A narrow bed with a faded quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin and pitcher, a wooden chair, and a series of hooks on the wall serving as a closet. A single window overlooked the street, its thin curtain stirring in what passed for a breeze. It was perhaps the most modest accommodation Lydia had ever occupied, but after the past week, it felt like sanctuary. She set her carpetbag on the chair and sank onto the bed, allowing herself exactly 5 minutes of stillness. 5 minutes to feel the exhaustion, the humiliation, the bone-deep fear of an uncertain future. 5 minutes to be weak. Then she stood, poured water from the pitcher into the basin, and washed the train dust from her face and hands. She smoothed her hair, retied her bonnet, and studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. 23 years old, passably pretty, her late mother had said, though nothing spectacular. Brown hair, gray eyes, a mouth perhaps a bit too wide, a nose a bit too strong. The face of a woman who'd been told she was fundamentally flawed, broken in the one way society deemed most important. "You are more than a womb," she told her reflection firmly. "You are educated, capable, strong. You will survive this." Her reflection looked unconvinced, but Lydia turned away before doubt could take deeper root. Socorro's main street was busier now as she ventured out, the afternoon bringing people out for errands and commerce. She passed the mercantile first, a general store with windows displaying everything from dry goods to mining equipment. A handwritten sign in the window read, "Clerk wanted, inquire within." Lydia's heart jumped. She pushed open the door, a bell jangling overhead. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, crowded with shelves and barrels and the mingled smells of coffee, tobacco, and dried spices. A man stood behind the counter, middle-aged, balding, with suspicious eyes that tracked her approach. "Help you?" he asked, his tone suggesting he'd rather she be anywhere else. "I saw your sign. About the clerk position?" His eyes traveled over her with an assessment nothing like Mrs. Chen's. This was coldly calculating, looking for flaws. "You got experience?" "I'm educated, well-read, and excellent with figures," Lydia said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm reliable and willing to work hard." "That ain't what I asked. You worked in a store before?" "No, but can't hire someone with no experience, especially not a woman on her own." He said it like an accusation. "Where's your husband?" The question hit like a physical blow. "I'm unmarried." "Unmarried and traveling alone." His lip curled slightly. "What kind of woman does that?" "The kind who has no other choice," Lydia wanted to say. "The kind who was returned like defective merchandise." But she could see in his face that no explanation would matter. "Thank you for your time," she managed, turning toward the door before he could see the color rising in her cheeks. "Try the saloon," he called after her, a nasty edge to his voice. "They're always looking for girls." Lydia kept walking, her spine rigid, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. The next 2 hours brought variations on the same theme. The bank needed no one. The hotel had recently hired staff. The restaurant owner took one look at her and said he only employed family members. The dressmaker barely looked up from her work before saying she had no need for assistance. By the time the church bells rang 5 o'clock, Lydia's feet ached, her throat was dry, and her carefully maintained composure was beginning to crack. She found herself standing in front of a small office with a shingle reading Dr. Theodore Whitmore, physician and surgeon. She wasn't sick. Couldn't afford a doctor even if she were. But the office looked quiet, professional, and something in her desperately needed to be somewhere other than the dusty street with its judging eyes and closed doors. She pushed open the door. The interior was cool and dim, smelling of carbolic acid and something else. Herbs, perhaps. A young Mexican woman sat at a desk near the window, writing in a ledger. She looked up with a pleasant expression. "May I help you?" Lydia hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. "Is the doctor in? I was hoping I might speak with him about employment possibilities." "You're a nurse?" "No, but I'm educated and capable of learning. I can read and write, manage accounts, assist with—" "Maria, who's there?" A man's voice came from the back room, cultured and carrying the crisp consonants of the East Coast. "A young woman seeking employment, doctor." "Send her in." Maria gestured toward the inner office. Lydia straightened her shoulders and stepped through the doorway. Dr. Theodore Whitmore was perhaps 40, with graying temples and keen blue eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He was washing his hands in a basin, his shirt sleeves rolled up, waistcoat unbuttoned. He glanced at her with curiosity, but not unkindness. "I'm afraid I'm not hiring at the moment, Miss Harper." "Lydia Harper." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I understand you're not looking for staff, Dr. Whitmore, but I wanted to introduce myself in case circumstances change. I'm new to Socorro and seeking any respectable employment. I'm educated, my father was a school teacher, and I'm particularly good with numbers and organization. I also have some knowledge of—" She broke off as shouting erupted from the street outside. Both she and Dr. Whitmore turned toward the window as the commotion grew louder, horses whinnying, men yelling, the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. "Get the doctor! He's bleeding bad! Someone grab that horse before it tramples!" Dr. Whitmore was already moving, grabbing his bag from the desk and heading for the door. Lydia followed on instinct, emerging onto the street to chaos. A massive bay horse was rearing and plunging in the middle of the street, stirrups flying, reins dangling. On the ground near the hitching post outside the saloon lay a man, curled on his side, one arm pressed against his ribs. Even from 20 feet away, Lydia could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt. Blood. "That horse is going to kill someone," a bystander shouted. The animal was indeed dangerous, eyes rolling white, nostrils flared, powerful hooves striking out at anything that moved. 3 men were trying to approach it, but it wheeled and kicked, forcing them back. Lydia didn't think. She simply moved. She'd grown up around horses. Her father had kept 2 for transportation, and she'd learned to handle them from childhood. This animal was terrified, not vicious. She could see it in the way it circled back toward its fallen rider, in the trembling of its flanks. "Miss, get back!" someone yelled. She ignored them, walking steadily toward the horse, her hands open and empty, her voice low and calm. "Easy now, easy. No one's going to hurt you." The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. It stopped wheeling, though its sides still heaved with panicked breathing. "That's it. Good boy. Brave boy." She kept talking, kept moving slowly closer. "Your rider's hurt, but we're going to help him. You did your job getting him here. Good, brave horse." She was close enough now to see the foam at its mouth, the wild rolling of its eyes. Close enough that if it struck out, those hooves would crush her skull. But she kept her breathing even, her movements slow and deliberate, projecting calm she didn't entirely feel. "Let me have those reins now. Let me help." Her hand closed around the trailing leather. The horse tossed its head but didn't bolt. She gathered the reins carefully, running her other hand along its neck, feeling the tremors running through its powerful body. "There we are. There we are. You're safe now." Behind her, she was dimly aware of Dr. Whitmore kneeling beside the injured man, of Maria running up with medical supplies, of the small crowd that had gathered. But her focus remained on the horse until its breathing began to slow, until it stood still, though still alert, until she could safely hand the reins to a wide-eyed boy who'd appeared at her elbow. "Walk him," she instructed quietly. "Just walk him slow and steady until he's calm." "Yes, ma'am," the boy breathed, looking at her like she'd performed a miracle. Only then did Lydia turn to the fallen man. Dr. Whitmore had torn open the bloody shirt, revealing a wound in the man's left side. A gunshot, Lydia realized with a shock. The doctor was packing it with gauze, but blood continued to seep around his hands. "I need to get him to my office," Dr. Whitmore said sharply. "He's losing too much blood. I can help," Lydia heard herself say. The doctor's eyes snapped to her face. "You said you weren't a nurse. I'm not, but I can follow instructions and I don't faint at the sight of blood. Can you keep pressure on this wound while we move him?" "Yes." "Then get down here." Lydia dropped to her knees in the dusty street, pressing her hands where Dr. Whitmore indicated, feeling hot blood pulse against her palms. The injured man's face was gray, his breathing shallow. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with dark hair and strong features currently contorted with pain. "Stay with me," Dr. Whitmore told him. "We're going to get you patched up. Miss Harper, maintain that pressure. You men," he gestured to the gathered crowd. "I need a door to use as a stretcher. Now." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of organized chaos. They got the wounded man, someone said his name was Cole, Ethan Cole, onto an improvised stretcher and carried him the half-block to Dr. Whitmore's office. Lydia maintained pressure on the wound the entire way, her hands slick with blood, her dress ruined, her mind oddly clear and focused. In the surgery, Dr. Whitmore worked with quick efficiency while issuing terse instructions. "Miss Harper, I need you to hand me instruments as I call for them. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Maria, prepare the chloroform. This is going to hurt like hell, and I need him unconscious." What followed was the most intense hour of Lydia's life. She handed scalpels and forceps and needles, held basins and sponges, mopped the doctor's brow when sweat threatened his vision. She watched him extract a bullet from between Ethan Cole's ribs, probe for damaged blood vessels, stitch torn flesh with meticulous care. "Good," Dr. Whitmore murmured at one point. "Very good, Miss Harper. Steady hands." She hadn't realized they were steady. Inside, she felt like she was trembling, but her hands remained rock solid, doing what needed to be done. Finally, Dr. Whitmore tied off the last suture and stepped back, wiping his hands. "That's all I can do. The rest is up to his constitution and luck. Maria, let's get him cleaned up and settled in the recovery room. Miss Harper, you can—" He stopped, really looking at her for the first time since the surgery had begun. She must have been quite a sight, her dress front soaked in blood, her hands stained red to the wrists, her hair falling from its pins, her face pale but composed. "You can wash up at that basin," he finished more gently. "There's soap and towels. Take your time." Lydia's hands began to shake the moment she plunged them into the warm water. Delayed reaction, she thought distantly, watching Ethan Cole's blood swirl pink in the basin. She scrubbed mechanically, thoroughly, until her skin was raw and clean. When she emerged from the surgery, Maria was brewing coffee in the outer office. Dr. Whitmore sat at his desk, making notes in what looked like a patient file. He looked up as Lydia appeared. "Sit down before you fall down," he said, gesturing to a chair. Lydia sat. Maria pressed a cup of hot coffee into her hands, and she sipped it gratefully despite the evening warmth. "Where did you learn to handle a panicked horse like that?" Dr. Whitmore asked. "My father kept horses. He taught me young." "And the steady hands during surgery? You truly have no nursing experience?" "None whatsoever. I simply did what needed doing." Dr. Whitmore studied her with those keen blue eyes. "Mr. Cole is going to need round-the-clock care for at least a week, possibly longer. The wound was serious but clean. The bullet didn't nick anything vital, but infection is a real risk and he'll be in considerable pain. He lives alone on a ranch about 8 miles out. There's no one to look after him there." Lydia's heart began to beat faster, sensing where this was going. "Maria manages this office brilliantly, but she has family obligations that prevent her from providing overnight care," the doctor continued. "I'm going to suggest that Mr. Cole convalesce here for the first few days, but after that, he'll need someone at the ranch. Someone who can change dressings, monitor for fever, prepare appropriate meals, ensure he doesn't overexert himself and tear those stitches." "You're offering me employment," Lydia said quietly. "I'm offering you temporary employment as Mr. Cole's nurse and housekeeper, provided he agrees to the arrangement when he's conscious. Room and board included, plus wages. If you prove capable, we can discuss a more permanent position assisting me here in town." He paused. "You did good work today, Miss Harper. Exceptional work, actually. I suspect you're running from something unfortunate, and I won't pry. But if you need a chance to start fresh, I'm offering one." Lydia's throat tightened. "I won't disappoint you." "See that you don't." But his eyes were kind. "Now go back to wherever you're staying and get some rest. Be here at 7 tomorrow morning. We'll see how our patient fares through the night." The walk back to the boarding house felt surreal. The sun was setting, painting the desert sky in impossible shades of orange and purple. Lydia's ruined dress drew stares, but she hardly noticed. Her mind was reeling with the sheer improbability of the day. This morning, she'd been hopeless. Tonight, she had employment. Temporary, yes, and contingent on a wounded stranger's approval, but employment nonetheless. Mrs. Chen took one look at her bloody dress and pointed wordlessly toward the back of the house. "You wash there. Burn that dress. Cannot be cleaned." At supper, a simple meal of rice, vegetables, and chicken that tasted like ambrosia to Lydia's empty stomach, Mrs. Chen asked no questions but listened while the other boarders discussed the shooting. "Cole caught some rustlers on his land," said a grizzled prospector. "They objected to being caught." "Lucky he made it to town," added a railroad clerk. 8 miles bleeding like that. Most men would have died." "That horse of his is loyal," the prospector continued. "And that woman who caught it, did you see that? Walked right up to a spooked animal like she was approaching a kitten." Lydia kept her eyes on her plate, but she felt Mrs. Chen's sharp gaze on her. Later, as she climbed the stairs to her small room, Mrs. Chen appeared beside her with a bundle of cloth. "You need better dress for nursing work," she said, pressing the bundle into Lydia's hands. "This belonged to my daughter. She with husband in San Francisco now, don't need. You take." "Mrs. Chen, I can't." "You take," the older woman repeated firmly. "You did brave thing today. Brave thing and smart thing. You be good nurse for Mr. Cole, then Dr. Whitmore keep you. Then you pay me back if you want. Or you pay forward to someone else who need help. Your choice." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes, the first she'd allowed herself to shed since Samuel Hartwick had declared her worthless. "Thank you." Mrs. Chen patted her hand once, briskly, then disappeared down the hallway. In her room, Lydia unfolded the bundle to find a simple but serviceable work dress in dark gray cotton, plus a practical apron. She hung them carefully on the wall hooks, then sank onto her bed. The events of the day crashed over her, the despair of the morning, the rejections, the sudden violence in the street, the blood and urgency of the surgery, Dr. Whitmore's unexpected offer, and through it all, the image of the wounded man's face. Ethan Cole. She would be caring for him, living in his home, responsible for his recovery. A stranger whose life had intersected with hers in the most unlikely way. She thought of Samuel Hartwick's cruel dismissal, of Dr. Pemberton's clinical verdict, of her own desperate fear that she had no value beyond the children she couldn't bear. Today, she'd stopped a panicked horse. She'd assisted in surgery. She'd been offered employment based not on her womb, but on her capabilities, her steady hands, her clear head under pressure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Mr. Cole might refuse her help, might be another Samuel Hartwick who saw her only as defective goods. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, Lydia Harper felt a tiny flicker of something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. She rose, poured fresh water in the basin, and washed again thoroughly. Then she brushed out her hair, said her evening prayers, though she kept them brief and practical, asking mainly for strength and competence rather than miracles, and climbed into the narrow bed. Through the thin window curtain, she could see stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. The same stars that had looked down on her humiliation in Silver Springs, on her lonely train journey, on every moment of fear and shame, but also the same stars that had witnessed her courage today. Lydia closed her eyes, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, slept without crying. Tomorrow would come, and with it, whatever fate had in store for her and the wounded cowboy whose blood still stained her memories and whose life had become unexpectedly tangled with her own. She didn't know yet that Ethan Cole would wake in 2 days and, when told of the arrangement, would agree to it with quiet gratitude. She didn't know that his ranch would become a haven rather than a prison, or that his gruff silence hid a loneliness as deep as her own. She didn't know that the man who'd been shot defending his property from thieves would turn out to value honesty, competence, and quiet strength more than he'd ever value the social conventions that had destroyed her. She didn't know any of that yet. But somewhere deep in her bones, beneath the exhaustion and fear, Lydia Harper sensed that her life had turned a corner today. That the woman who'd stood on that train platform in shame was not the same woman who would wake tomorrow to begin work as a nurse. The desert night deepened around Socorro, bringing its customary chill after the day's brutal heat. In Dr. Whitmore's recovery room, Ethan Cole's fever spiked and broke again, while Maria kept vigilant watch. In Mrs. Chen's boarding house, Lydia dreamed fitfully of horses and blood and a pair of gray eyes that hadn't yet opened but that she somehow knew would change everything. And in the morning, her new life would begin. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Lydia arrived at Dr. Whitmore's office the next morning, wearing Mrs. Chen's daughter's gray dress and carrying herself with a composure she didn't entirely feel. Maria was already there, heating water on the small stove in the corner, her face drawn with fatigue. "How is he?" Lydia asked quietly. "Alive, which is more than I expected at midnight." Maria poured hot water into a basin. "The fever came hard around 10 o'clock. Dr. Whitmore was here until 3. He's sleeping now in the back room, the doctor, I mean. Mr. Cole is awake, barely, asking for water mostly." Lydia set down her small bundle. Clean rags Mrs. Chen had provided, along with a tin of the salve the landlady swore prevented infection. "What do you need me to do?" Maria's shoulders sagged slightly with relief. "Everything. Dr. Whitmore will check the wound when he wakes, but until then, Mr. Cole needs water, broth if he can take it, cool compresses for the fever. He's been asking about his horse." "The bay? I saw a boy walking it yesterday. Tommy Reese took the animal to the livery." "It's being cared for." Maria wiped her hands on her apron. "Mr. Cole is in the first recovery room. Be warned, he's not the most pleasant patient when he's in pain." The recovery room was small and dim, one window covered with a thin shade to keep out the harsh morning light. Ethan Cole lay on a narrow bed, his torso wrapped in white bandages already showing small spots of seepage. His face in repose was younger than Lydia had realized, perhaps 32 or 33, with strong bones and skin weathered by sun and wind. Dark hair fell across his forehead, damp with fever sweat. As she approached with fresh water, his eyes opened. They were gray, the color of storm clouds, and surprisingly alert despite the pain that tightened the corners of his mouth. "You're the woman with the horse," he said, his voice rough and dry. "I am. And you're the man who got shot." Lydia poured water into a cup. "Can you sit up enough to drink, or do you need help?" He tried to push himself up and immediately went white, sweat breaking out across his forehead. Lydia set down the cup and moved to his side, sliding her arm behind his shoulders with the same calm efficiency she'd used in surgery. "Let me help. No use tearing those stitches Dr. Whitmore worked so hard on." Ethan allowed her to support him, though she could feel the tension in his body. A man unused to needing help, uncomfortable with the vulnerability. She held the cup to his lips, and he drank deeply, desperately, water running down his chin. "Slower," she said firmly. "You'll make yourself sick." He pulled back, breathing hard from even that small exertion. "My horse, Thunder, is he—" "Safe at the livery. A boy named Tommy is caring for him. The animal's fine, Mr. Cole. Better than you are at the moment." Something that might have been relief crossed his face. "Good. That's good." His eyes focused on her more clearly. "You stopped him. I remember that. He could have killed you. But he didn't. He was scared, not vicious." Lydia eased him back down onto the pillows. "Now rest. Dr. Whitmore will examine you when he wakes." "Don't need examining. Need to get back to my ranch." "You need to heal. You were shot, Mr. Cole. The bullet went deep." "I've had worse." But even as he said it, his eyes were closing, exhaustion pulling him back under. Lydia spent the morning learning the rhythms of nursing work. She changed his compresses when the fever spiked, helped him drink when he woke, and cleaned the seepage from his bandages with gentle efficiency. Dr. Whitmore emerged around 9, examined the wound with satisfaction, and declared that if infection didn't set in, Ethan Cole would likely survive. "Though his disposition might kill him before the bullet wound does," the doctor added dryly. "He's already demanding to leave." He mentioned his ranch. Is there truly no one there to help him? Ethan Cole is what you might call determinedly solitary. He works the land alone, sells his cattle once a year, comes to town only when necessary. I've been his doctor for 5 years, and I doubt I've exchanged more than 100 words with the man. Dr. Whitmore cleaned his instruments with methodical care. "Which is why this arrangement concerns me. He's not accustomed to having anyone in his space, let alone a woman he doesn't know." "Will he refuse?" "Possibly, probably, but he's also practical enough to know he can't manage alone right now." The doctor glanced at her. "How do you feel about spending several weeks in isolation with a wounded, likely cantankerous stranger?" Lydia thought of the alternative, returning to the desperate search for work, the closed doors, the pitying or contemptuous stares. "I've faced worse prospects, Dr. Whitmore." "I don't doubt it." His eyes were kind but knowing. "Whatever you're running from, Miss Harper, I hope you find some peace out at the Cole Ranch." 2 days passed in a haze of nursing duties. Lydia learned that Ethan Cole was indeed a difficult patient. He complained about staying in bed, objected to the broth Maria prepared, and attempted twice to stand on his own before dizziness and pain forced him back down. But she also noticed that he never complained about the wound itself, never cried out when Dr. Whitmore changed the dressings, and always thanked her quietly when she brought him water. On the 3rd morning, Dr. Whitmore made his decision. "The wound is healing cleanly, no signs of infection. If we can keep it that way for another week, he should recover fully, but he needs constant supervision, someone to ensure he doesn't overdo it, someone to watch for fever or drainage, someone to keep him fed and the wound clean." He looked between Lydia and his patient. "Mr. Cole, I'm proposing that Miss Harper accompany you back to your ranch as a live-in nurse and housekeeper for the next 2 to 3 weeks. She'll have her own quarters, of course, and I'll ride out twice weekly to check on your progress. You'll pay her standard wages plus room and board." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I don't need a nursemaid." "You need exactly that. Unless you'd prefer to stay here in town another 2 weeks? The look on Ethan's face suggested he'd rather eat glass. His eyes shifted to Lydia, assessment and wariness in equal measure. "You know anything about running a ranch household?" "I know how to cook, clean, and follow medical instructions. I'm a quick learner for anything else. I'm not easy company." "Neither am I, at the moment." Something flickered in his eyes. Might have been respect. Might have been amusement. "You're the one who stopped Thunder. That took either courage or stupidity." "Perhaps both." The ghost of a smile touched his mouth, then vanished. "Fine. But I want it clear. This is temporary. Soon as I'm healed, you go back to town. I don't need permanent help." "Understood, Mr. Cole. And you stay out of my business. I value my privacy." As do I. He studied her a moment longer, and Lydia had the uncomfortable sensation of being thoroughly evaluated. Whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, because he gave a short nod. When do we leave? Tomorrow, Dr. Whitmore said. I'll arrange a wagon. You're not riding for at least another week. The journey to Ethan Cole's ranch took nearly 3 hours in the borrowed wagon, with Dr. Whitmore driving and Ethan propped against the side rail, his face gray with pain he refused to acknowledge. Lydia sat in the back with her carpet bag and the medical supplies the doctor had provided, watching the landscape transform from town to open desert. The ranch, when they finally reached it, was more substantial than she'd expected. The main house was adobe and wood, low and sturdy, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Behind it stood a barn, a corral, and several smaller outbuildings. The land stretched in all directions, broken only by scrub brush and the distant purple shadows of mountains. It was beautiful in a harsh, lonely way. I'll help you inside, Dr. Whitmore said, pulling the wagon to a stop. I can manage. But Ethan's attempt to climb down proved otherwise. He made it 2 steps before his legs buckled. Lydia was there instantly, ducking under his arm to take his weight. He stiffened at the contact but was in no position to object. Together, she and Dr. Whitmore got him into the house and onto a bed in what appeared to be the main bedroom. I'll sleep elsewhere, Lydia said immediately. Just tell me where. Ethan gestured vaguely toward a door. There's a room. Was going to end up be, doesn't matter. It's clean enough. The room he indicated was small but adequate, with a simple bed frame, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the corral. Lydia set her carpet bag down and returned to find Dr. Whitmore giving final instructions. Keep the wound clean and dry. Change the dressing twice daily. If you see any red streaking, any foul smell, any fever above what he's been running, you send word immediately. The Reese family has a ranch about 5 miles east. Their son Tommy can ride to town for me if needed. I understand. Dr. Whitmore turned to Ethan. And you, follow her instructions. Don't try to work. Don't lift anything heavier than a coffee cup. Don't be a stubborn fool. Wouldn't dream of it, Ethan said dryly. After the doctor left, the house fell into profound silence. Lydia stood in the main room, a combination kitchen and living area with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and minimal furnishings, and felt the weight of the situation settle over her. She was alone with a stranger, miles from town, responsible for his care and recovery. From the bedroom came Ethan's voice, rough with pain. There's food in the larder. Coffee's in the tin by the stove. Make whatever you want. Lydia explored the kitchen with growing respect for its organization. Everything had its place: coffee, flour, dried beans, salt pork, a few withered potatoes, simple provisions for a man who lived alone. She found a pot, started coffee, and began assessing what she could make for supper. An hour later, she brought him weak broth and dry toast, all Dr. Whitmore had approved for the first few days. Ethan was propped against the headboard, his face still too pale, but his eyes alert. That's not much of a meal, he observed. It's the meal that won't tear your stitches or make you sick. When Dr. Whitmore approves, you can have something more substantial. He took the broth without further complaint, sipping slowly while Lydia stood by the window, giving him privacy. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. Why are you here? Ethan asked suddenly. Lydia turned. Dr. Whitmore hired me to... No. Why are you in Socorro at all? You're educated, well-spoken. You don't belong in a frontier town nursing wounded strangers. The observation was too accurate, too close to the shame she'd been trying to outrun. I needed work. Dr. Whitmore provided it. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're entitled to, Mr. Cole. You said you value privacy. So do I. Their eyes met and held. Something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or at least a mutual agreement not to pry. Ethan nodded slowly and handed back the half-empty bowl. Fair enough. But for what it's worth, whatever you're running from, you'll find no judgment here. I'm not interested in a woman's past. The words hit harder than he could have known. Lydia took the bowl with hands that trembled slightly. Thank you. That's unexpectedly kind. Not kind, just practical. We all got reasons for the choices we make. That night, Lydia lay in the small bedroom listening to unfamiliar sounds. wind against the adobe walls, some animal calling in the distance, the creak of the house settling. In the main bedroom, she could hear Ethan's restless movements, the occasional sharp intake of breath when he shifted wrong and pain flared. She rose twice to check on him, bringing water and adjusting his pillows. Both times he accepted her help with grudging gratitude, and both times she retreated to her room before the silence could become awkward. This was her life now, at least for the next few weeks. Nursing a wounded stranger in isolated country, with nothing but the desert and her own thoughts for company. It should have terrified her. Instead, Lydia found herself feeling something unexpected, a curious sense of relief. Here, she was simply a nurse doing a job. Not a failed bride, not a barren woman, not damaged goods. Just Lydia Harper, hired to keep a man alive while he healed. It wasn't much of an identity, but it was honest work. And after everything she'd endured, honesty felt like water in the desert. The days developed a rhythm. Mornings, she changed Ethan's dressings, prepared light meals, and tidied the house. Afternoons, she read to him from the small collection of books she found on a shelf, mostly practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, but also a worn copy of Shakespeare's plays and a collection of Robert Browning's poetry that surprised her. "Didn't take you for a poetry reader," she said on the fourth day, holding up the Browning. "My mother's," Ethan said shortly. "She died when I was 12. Took the book when I left home." Lydia heard the finality in his tone and didn't press. Instead, she read aloud from the ring in the book, her voice filling the quiet house with cadence and drama. Ethan listened with his eyes closed, his breathing gradually evening out into something like peace. By the end of the first week, he was sitting up without assistance and taking solid food. Dr. Whitmore's visit brought good news. The wound was healing exceptionally well, with no signs of infection. "Miss Harper's care is clearly exemplary," the doctor said. "How are you managing otherwise?" "Fine," Ethan said, but his eyes cut briefly to Lydia in a way that suggested the situation was more complicated than that single word implied. After Dr. Whitmore left, Ethan asked her to help him walk to the porch. It was the first time he'd been outside since returning, and Lydia could see the hunger in his face as he looked over his land. "It's beautiful here," she said, standing beside him while he gripped the porch rail for support. "It's mine. That's what matters." He paused, then added more quietly, "I bought this place 6 years ago with money I'd saved working other men's ranches. Every building, every fence post, every head of cattle, I earned it myself. No family money, no handouts, just work." There was fierce pride in his voice, and something else, a need to establish his independence, his self-sufficiency. Lydia understood that need better than he knew. "You've built something solid," she said. "Trying to." He glanced at her sideways. "You're good at this. The nursing, the managing, ever done it before?" "No, I told you. I'm learning as I go." "Could have fooled me. Doc Whitmore says I'd probably be dead or crippled if you hadn't kept that wound clean and me from being a fool." He shifted his weight, wincing slightly. "So I suppose I owe you thanks, for more than just stopping thunder." "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Cole. You're paying me wages." "Ethan, if you're going to be living in my house, call me Ethan." "Lydia," she offered in return. He nodded, and they stood in companionable silence, watching the sun paint long shadows across the desert floor. The second week brought new challenges. Ethan was healing rapidly, too rapidly for his own patience. Lydia caught him trying to carry firewood, attempting to check on his horses, and once nearly making it to the barn before dizziness forced him back. "You're going to tear those stitches," she said sharply after the barn incident, her fear making her voice harder than intended. "And then all this healing will be for nothing. I can't just sit idle while the ranch falls apart." "The ranch isn't falling apart. Tommy Reese has been coming daily to feed the horses and check the cattle. Everything's being managed by a 12-year-old boy and a woman who knows nothing about ranching." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "This is my responsibility. And staying alive and whole is your responsibility too. Or does your pride matter more than your life?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended, born from her own memories of being deemed worthless because her body couldn't perform its expected function. She understood the fear of being incapable, of failing at the one thing you were supposed to do. Ethan stared at her, surprise flickering across his face. That's quite a speech from a woman who's been here less than 2 weeks. Perhaps, but I've seen what happens when people push beyond their limits because they can't accept help. It doesn't end well. Speaking from experience? Observing from experience. They looked at each other across the small kitchen, tension crackling in the air. Then Ethan's shoulders sagged slightly. You're right. I know you're right. I don't know how to be helpless in my own home. The admission clearly cost him. Lydia's anger evaporated, replaced by understanding. You're not helpless. You're healing. There's a difference. Doesn't feel like it. I know. And she did. The frustration of feeling broken, inadequate, unable to fulfill expectations. But you will heal, Ethan, if you let yourself. Something in her voice must have conveyed her own pain because his expression softened. What happened to you, Lydia? What brought you to Socorro running scared? She could have deflected, should have, by their earlier agreement. But standing in his kitchen with afternoon light slanting through the windows, she found herself wanting to tell the truth, at least part of it. I was engaged to be married. It didn't work out. I came to Socorro to start fresh. He hurt you. It wasn't a question. Not physically, but yes, he hurt me. Ethan nodded slowly. Then he was a fool. Any man who'd let you go wasn't worth having in the first place. The words, simple and matter-of-fact, pierced something in Lydia's carefully maintained composure. She turned away before he could see the tears threatening. I should check your dressing. He let her change the subject, but something had shifted between them, a tentative trust beginning to form. That evening, Tommy Reese arrived with news that rustlers had been spotted on the northern section of Ethan's land. Ethan immediately tried to stand, to reach for the rifle mounted above the door, and Lydia had to physically block his path. Tommy can handle it, she said firmly. Or we can send him to fetch the sheriff. What you cannot do is ride out there and get yourself killed. Those are my cattle they're stealing. And this is your life you're risking. Tommy, ride to town and get the sheriff. Tell him what you saw. The boy looked between them, wide-eyed, then nodded and ran for his horse. Ethan stood in the middle of the room, vibrating with frustrated energy, while Lydia held her ground. You can't protect everything by yourself, she said quietly. Sometimes you have to trust others to help. I don't trust easily. Neither do I. But we don't have much choice, do we? The sheriff came, dealt with the rustlers, and recovered most of the stolen cattle. Ethan accepted the news with grim satisfaction and a grudging admission that Lydia had been right to stop him. You're a stubborn woman, he said that night over supper. So I've been told. Good. Stubborn has its place out here. The weak don't last. Lydia thought of her own weakness, her body's inability to perform its expected function, and said nothing. But later, lying in her small room, she found herself wondering if Ethan's definition of weakness was different from the one she'd internalized. He seemed to value capability, determination, the ability to endure, none of which had anything to do with fertility. It was a strange, unsettling thought. By the start of the 3rd week, Dr. Whitmore pronounced Ethan well enough to begin light work. The stitches could come out in a few more days. The danger of infection had passed. Recovery was proceeding better than expected. Thanks to Miss Harper's excellent care, the doctor added, smiling at Lydia. You have a gift for this work. Have you considered training as a proper nurse? I could arrange— No, Lydia said quickly. Too quickly. Both men looked at her with surprise. I mean, I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I don't think nursing is my calling. The truth was more complicated. She'd discovered she was good at caregiving, good at the practical work of healing. But the thought of staying in Socorro, of building a permanent life here, where her past might catch up with her, where someone might recognize her as the returned bride from Silver Springs, it made her chest tighten with anxiety. After Dr. Whitmore left, Ethan asked, You planning to leave soon as I'm healed? That was the agreement. It was. But I'm asking what you want, not what we agreed. Lydia busied herself clearing the coffee cups. I haven't thought that far ahead. Liar. She turned to find him watching her with those unsettling gray eyes. I beg your pardon? You're always thinking ahead. I've watched you. You plan every meal, every task, every movement. You're not someone who lives without thinking about the future. He leaned back in his chair. So what do you want, Lydia? After this is done? What did she want? The question felt impossibly large. Safety, dignity, a place where her past didn't matter. A life built on something other than her ability to bear children. I want to not be afraid anymore, she said, finally, honestly. Ethan nodded as if this made perfect sense. Fear's a reasonable thing out here. The land, the isolation, the danger, it's all real. But there's a difference between being cautious and being controlled by fear. And which am I? I think you're trying to figure that out. The conversation stayed with her for days. She found herself watching Ethan as he gradually returned to his normal routine. Slow at first, then with increasing confidence. He moved through his ranch work with quiet competence, never wasting motion, never complaining about the lingering soreness in his side. He was, she realized, a man completely at peace with his solitary life. He didn't seem lonely, didn't appear to miss human companionship or conversation. He was simply content, whole unto himself. It was both admirable and slightly terrifying. One evening near the end of her third week, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan said, "You could stay." Lydia's heart stuttered. "I'm sorry?" The ranch could use someone to manage the household side of things. Cooking, cleaning, the garden I've been neglecting. It would free me up for the cattle work. He wasn't looking at her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I'd pay fair wages. You'd have your own space. No expectations beyond the work itself. It was carefully phrased to be professional, appropriate. But Lydia heard what he wasn't saying, that he'd grown accustomed to her presence, that the house felt less empty with her in it, that perhaps he valued her company even if he'd never admitted aloud. "I'll think about it," she said, because she didn't trust herself to say more. That night, she lay awake running through the possibilities. Staying meant safety, employment, a place to rebuild her life away from the judgment of Silver Springs. But it also meant isolation, proximity to a man she was beginning to understand, and she could admit it in the darkness, respect deeply. And respect, she knew from hard experience, could too easily shade into something more dangerous, something that would end in heartbreak when Ethan inevitably learned the truth about her inability to bear children and decided she wasn't worth keeping after all. Better to leave before that revelation, before she let herself hope for something that could never be. But as dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in impossible colors, Lydia found herself still uncertain, still caught between the fear that had driven her to Socorro and the fragile possibility of something different taking root in this harsh, beautiful place. In the main room, she could hear Ethan moving around, starting coffee, beginning his day. A man who valued his solitude but had offered her a place within it. The question was whether she was brave enough to accept. Lydia's answer came not in words but in action. She stayed through the 4th week, then the 5th, settling into the rhythms of ranch life with a naturalness that surprised them both. She planted a kitchen garden, mended Ethan's worn shirts, organized the chaos of his record-keeping into neat ledgers that tracked expenses and profits with precision he'd never bothered to maintain. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental oven, to preserve vegetables for winter, to read the sky for coming weather the way Ethan did instinctively. And slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Ethan was a man of few words but consistent actions. He rose before dawn and worked until dusk, his movements efficient and purposeful. He never raised his voice, never showed temper, but could convey disapproval with a single look. He was scrupulously fair in all his dealings, paid Tommy Reese generously for his help, and once rode 10 miles to return a tool he'd borrowed from a neighbor. He also, Lydia discovered, had an unexpected dry humor that emerged in brief flashes. When she burned her first attempt at biscuits into charcoal lumps, he'd examined one gravely and said, "Well, if we run out of ammunition, at least we have options." When a stubborn hen refused to leave her nesting box, he'd looked at Lydia and remarked, "She reminds me of someone. Can't imagine who." These small moments of levity felt precious in the vast silence of the ranch, but there were also moments of tension, when the proximity and isolation created friction neither knew quite how to navigate. Ethan was unused to sharing his space, to accommodating another person's presence and preferences. Lydia was hyper-aware of overstepping, of becoming too comfortable, of forgetting that this arrangement was temporary employment, not a home. The crisis came on a Tuesday evening in late September. They'd fallen into the habit of taking coffee on the porch after supper, sitting in companionable silence while the desert cooled and the stars emerged. On this particular evening, Ethan had been quiet even by his standards, his coffee growing cold in his hands. "Something on your mind?" Lydia finally asked. He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Doc Whitmore mentioned today that you'd turned down his offer to train as a nurse." "I did. He thinks you have real talent for it, could make a good living in town." Lydia's stomach tightened. "Are you suggesting I should leave?" "I'm asking why you haven't." He finally looked at her, his gray eyes unreadable in the fading light. "You've been here nearly 2 months, Lydia. The job you were hired for ended weeks ago. Yet you're still here, working for wages you could earn more comfortably in town. So I'm asking, what are you running from that makes an isolated ranch preferable to civilization?" The question hung in the air between them, demanding honesty she wasn't sure she could give. Lydia set down her own cup with trembling hands. "I told you, my engagement ended badly." "That's not the whole truth, and we both know it." Ethan's voice was gentle but implacable. "I'm not asking to pry, Lydia, but if you're going to stay here, and I want you to stay, then I need to know what I'm dealing with. Is someone going to show up looking for you? Are you in some kind of trouble?" "No, nothing like that." She drew a shaky breath. "I'm not running from the law or from a dangerous man. I'm running from judgment, from shame, from a verdict I can't escape no matter how far I travel." "What verdict?" And there it was. The moment she'd been dreading since the day she'd stopped his panicked horse in Socorro Street. The moment when the fragile peace she'd found would shatter against the reality of what she was, what she lacked. "I was a mail-order bride," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I traveled to Silver Springs to marry a rancher named Samuel Hartwick. We were married within hours of my arrival. The marriage was annulled the next day." Ethan waited, his face carefully neutral. "Mr. Hartwick had me examined by a doctor. The doctor declared that I cannot." She forced the words out. "I'm barren, Ethan. I can't have children. Samuel had advertised specifically for a wife who could give him sons. When he learned I couldn't provide that, he sent me back like defective merchandise. The whole town knew within a day. I became a joke, a cautionary tale, a woman so broken she couldn't fulfill her basic purpose." The silence that followed felt endless. Lydia couldn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the disappointment or disgust that must be crossing his features. She stared at her hands, gripped white-knuckled in her lap, and waited for the rejection she knew was coming. "That's why you came to Socorro," Ethan said finally. "Why you were so desperate for work. Why you flinched every time someone asked about your past." "Yes. And you thought I'd care about this because—" The question caught her off guard. She looked up to find him watching her with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "Because every man cares about it," she said bitterly. "Children are the point of marriage, the reason men take wives. Without that ability, You're what? Less valuable? Less capable? Less worthy of respect?" His voice had gone hard. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." Lydia blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Samuel Hartwick is a fool, and that doctor should be ashamed of himself." Ethan stood, pacing to the porch rail. "You really think your worth as a person is determined by your ability to reproduce? That's all you are? A potential incubator?" "That's what society believes, what men believe." "Then society and most men are idiots." He turned to face her. "In the past 2 months, you've proven yourself intelligent, capable, resourceful, and braver than half the men I know. You stopped a panicked horse that could have killed you. You assisted in surgery without training. You've managed this household, improved my record-keeping, planned for winter provisions I would have neglected, and made this place feel less like a prison of solitude. And you think all of that counts for nothing because you can't bear children?" "It counted for nothing to Samuel Hartwick." "Then Samuel Hartwick is a damn fool who deserves to spend his life alone." Ethan moved back to his chair, sitting down heavily. "Listen to me, Lydia. I don't want children. Never have. The idea of being responsible for raising another human being terrifies me more than rustlers or drought or market crashes. If I had wanted a family, I'd have married years ago. But I chose this life specifically because it's solitary, because I don't have to answer to anyone or shape my existence around someone else's needs. Lydia stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. You stayed here because you're good at the work and because this place offers you refuge from judgment, Ethan continued. I want you to stay because you make the ranch run better, because your company is less tiresome than I expected, and because I respect you. None of that has anything to do with children. None of it. You say that now, but nothing. I'm saying it because it's true. He met her eyes steadily. I'm not Samuel Hartwick. I'm not going to value you based on your reproductive capacity. That's not who I am, and it's not what I want from you. Then what do you want? The question came out as barely a whisper. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, careful. Honestly, I'm still figuring that out. I know I want you to stay. I know I value your presence here more than I expected to value anyone's presence. But beyond that, he shrugged. I'm not good at this. Feelings, relationships. I've spent the better part of a decade avoiding both. So have I, Lydia admitted. Even before Samuel, I'd convinced myself that marriage would be a practical arrangement at best. Love seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford. And now? Now I don't know what to think. She looked at him across the small space between their chairs. You're not what I expected, Ethan Cole. Good or bad? I haven't decided yet. The ghost of a smile crossed his face. Fair enough. Take your time deciding, but know this. Your secret is safe with me. I won't tell anyone, won't judge you for it, and won't treat you any differently because of it. You're still just Lydia to me. Still the stubborn woman who argues with me about overexertion and burns biscuits and reads poetry like she's performing Shakespeare on a stage. Despite everything, Lydia felt a laugh bubble up. I do not read dramatically. You absolutely do. Last week you made the bishop orders his tomb sound like a murder confession. It practically is a murder confession. My point exactly. They sat in the gathering darkness, and something that had been twisted tight in Lydia's chest began to loosen. He knew. He knew the worst thing about her, the fundamental flaw that had defined her worth in Samuel Hartwick's eyes and in society's judgment, and he didn't care. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not being Samuel Hartwick. That's a low bar, but I'll take it. The moment passed, but its impact lingered. Over the following weeks, a shift occurred in their relationship, subtle but unmistakable. The careful politeness gave way to genuine ease. They argued about everything from the best way to organize the barn to whether Robert Browning or Walt Whitman was the superior poet. They worked side by side on ranch tasks, Lydia learning to help with the horses while Ethan occasionally assisted with household chores that required two pairs of hands. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Lydia began to hope. It was dangerous, that hope. It whispered that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life here. That maybe Ethan's acceptance wasn't just tolerance, but something deeper. That maybe the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, meant something more than employer appreciating employee. But hope was a fragile thing, easily shattered by reality. The shattering came on a cold October morning when a woman arrived at the ranch in an elegant buggy driven by a hired man. She was perhaps 40, handsome rather than beautiful, dressed in expensive clothing that spoke of wealth and refinement. She swept onto the porch like she owned it, her eyes taking in Lydia's work dress and flour-dusted hands with barely concealed disdain. I'm looking for Ethan Cole, she announced. I'm Catherine Blackwood, his former employer's widow. Ethan emerged from the barn at the sound of voices, his expression shifting from surprise to wariness when he saw his visitor. Mrs. Blackwood, this is unexpected. I should hope so. I've traveled all the way from Denver. She gestured impatiently toward Lydia. Are you going to introduce me to your help? This is Miss Lydia Harper. She manages the household. Lydia, Mrs. Catherine Blackwood. I worked for her late husband for several years before buying this place. Catherine's smile was sharp as glass. How quaint. I had no idea you'd acquired domestic staff, Ethan. The last time we spoke, you were quite adamant about maintaining your solitary existence. Things change, Ethan's voice was carefully neutral. What brings you to New Mexico, Catherine? Business and a proposal. She glanced at Lydia, which I'd prefer to discuss privately. Lydia recognized dismissal when she heard one. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. She retreated into the house, but the thin walls meant she could hear every word of the conversation that followed. You look well, Ethan. Ranch life agrees with you. It does. Now what's this about a proposal? Direct as ever. Very well. A pause, the rustle of fabric as Catherine presumably sat down. My late husband thought very highly of you. You were his best foreman, possibly the best he ever employed. When he passed, I inherited his holdings. 3 ranches, substantial cattle herds, mining interests. It's far too much for me to manage alone. I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm not interested in returning to work for someone else. I'm not offering you employment, Ethan. I'm offering you a partnership, full management of the Colorado holdings in exchange for a 50% stake in the profits. You'd have complete operational control. Lydia's hands stilled in the bread dough she'd been kneading. And in exchange, Ethan asked, his voice carefully controlled, your expertise, your reputation, and another pause. Your name. I'm proposing marriage, Ethan, a partnership in business and in life. We're both practical people. We understand each other. There's respect between us, which is more than most marriages have. Together, we could build an empire. The silence stretched so long, Lydia thought her heart might stop beating. I'm honored by the offer, Ethan said finally, but I need time to consider it. Of course. I'm staying at the hotel in Socorro for the next week. Come to town when you've made your decision. The sound of her rising. Think carefully, Ethan. This ranch is charming, but it's small, isolated, limited in its potential. What I'm offering is a chance to build something truly significant, to have a real partner, an equal, someone who understands the ranching business, not just... Her voice trailed off meaningfully. Well, you understand what I'm saying. After Catherine left, the house fell into terrible silence. Lydia stood at the kitchen table, her hands still buried in bread dough, her mind reeling. A partnership. Marriage. Everything Ethan had said he didn't want, presented in terms he might actually accept, practical, businesslike, free of messy emotions or unrealistic expectations. And Catherine Blackwood was clearly everything Lydia was not. Wealthy, sophisticated, connected, capable of providing a true partnership in building a ranching empire. She heard Ethan's footsteps on the porch, the creak of the door opening. She couldn't bring herself to look at him. Lydia, you should accept. The words came out flat, dead. It's an excellent opportunity. Far better than anything you could build here alone. I didn't ask for your opinion on my business decisions. No, but I'm giving it anyway. She finally looked up, forcing her expression into something neutral. Mrs. Blackwood is right. This ranch is small. What she's offering is substantial, and a practical marriage to someone who understands your work makes more sense than anything else. Ethan crossed his arms, his face unreadable. Than anything else? Say what you mean, Lydia. Then continuing to employ a housekeeper and living in isolation. She can give you partnership, expansion, a future. I can give you clean laundry and burned biscuits. Is that really what you think? His voice had gone quiet, dangerous. That all you offer is domestic service? It's all I can offer. The pain was rising now, threatening to break through her careful control. She's right for you, Ethan. She's what a man like you needs. A man like me? He moved closer, his gray eyes intense. And what kind of man is that, exactly? Ambitious, capable, deserving of a real partner, not a broken woman who can't even... She broke off, unable to finish. There it is. Ethan's voice was hard now. You're still letting Samuel Hartwick and his damn doctor define your worth. Still believing that you're less than because of something you have no control over. It's not about belief. It's about reality. Catherine Blackwood can give you children if you decide you want them. I can't. She can give you social connections, business opportunities, a respected name. I can't. She can stand beside you as an equal partner. I'm just your housekeeper. You're not just anything. He was in front of her now, his hands gripping the edge of the table. And I already told you. I don't want children. I don't care about society connections or a respected name. What I want... He stopped abruptly, as if the words had escaped without permission. Lydia's heart was hammering. What do you want, Ethan? The question hung between them, weighted with everything they'd been carefully not saying for weeks. Ethan's jaw worked, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. I want you to stop running, he said finally, roughly. I want you to stop believing you're worth less than you are. I want you to look at what we've built here over the past 2 months and see it for what it really is. And what is it? It's a partnership, Lydia. Maybe not the kind Catherine's offering, but it's real. It works. We work well together. You've made this place better, made my life better, and it has nothing to do with children or social status or any of the things you think define worth. But it could be so much more with her, Lydia whispered. You could have so much more. More money, maybe. More land. More cattle. His voice softened. But not more peace. Not more honest companionship. Not more of what actually matters to me. Lydia felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. You're not thinking clearly. Catherine just surprised you with a major offer. You need time to consider it properly without whatever this is complicating things. Whatever this is? Ethan's laugh was harsh. You really don't know, or are you just too scared to admit it? Admit what? He pushed back from the table, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she'd come to recognize. That this stopped being about employment weeks ago. That when I said I wanted you to stay, it wasn't because you're a good housekeeper. That every time you argue with me about overexertion or read poetry on the porch or laugh at something ridiculous, I find myself thinking about how empty this place was before you came. How empty it would be if you left. The words hit like physical blows, each one cracking the careful walls she'd built around her heart. Ethan, don't what? Tell the truth? Why not? You demanded honesty from me. Now you're getting it. He met her eyes directly. I care about you, Lydia. More than I planned to. More than is probably wise. And the idea of marrying Catherine Blackwood for business purposes while you live here as my employee makes me physically ill. Then send me away. Her voice broke. Accept her offer and send me away. It's the practical choice. The smart choice. The hell it is. Ethan, be reasonable. I'm barren. I can't give you heirs, can't continue your family line, I don't have a family line I care about continuing. The words came out almost a shout. Ethan rarely raised his voice, and the sudden volume shocked them both. He took a breath, visibly controlling himself. I left my family at 17 and never looked back. My father was a drunk who beat my mother until she died from it. My brothers followed his example. I have no interest in passing on that legacy, in blood or in name. The idea that I'd need or want children is based on assumptions that have nothing to do with who I am. Lydia stared at him, this revelation of his past reframing everything she thought she knew. So when I say I don't care that you're barren, I mean it, Ethan continued more quietly. It's not something I'm overlooking or tolerating. It's genuinely irrelevant to me. What matters is that you're intelligent, capable, brave, and stubborn enough to call me out when I'm being a fool. What matters is that I respect you more than I've respected anyone in years. What matters is that I want to build a life with you, not in spite of your supposed flaw, but because of who you actually are. The tears were falling now, and Lydia couldn't stop them. You don't know what you're saying. You're caught up in the moment, in proximity, I know exactly what I'm saying. He moved closer again, his voice gentle now. I'm saying that children were never why I'd want you. I'm saying that Catherine's offer, generous as it is, doesn't interest me because it would mean losing what I've found here, with you. I'm saying that maybe, if you could stop believing Samuel Hartwick's verdict long enough to see clearly, you'd realize that we've already built something worth keeping. What if you change your mind? The question came out small, terrified. What if someday you regret choosing a barren woman over a partnership that could have given you everything? What if I don't? What if this, he gestured between them, is exactly what I need? What if you're exactly who I need? Lydia wanted desperately to believe him, but years of conditioning, of having her worth defined by her reproductive capacity, made it almost impossible to accept that a man could genuinely not care about children, that she could be enough on her own merits. I need to think, she managed. This is too much, too fast. I need time. I know. Ethan stepped back, giving her space. Take whatever time you need. I'm going to ride out and check the north pasture. I'll be gone most of the day. After he left, Lydia sank into a chair and let herself weep. Not from sadness exactly, but from the overwhelming confusion of having everything she thought she knew turned upside down. Ethan cared about her, had essentially rejected Catherine Blackwood's substantial offer because he wanted, what? A future with his housekeeper? A partnership with a barren woman who brought nothing to the table except domestic skills and a damaged past? It didn't make sense. Except it did make a terrible kind of sense if she could bring herself to believe that he meant what he said, that children truly weren't important to him, that he valued her for herself, not for what her body could or couldn't do. She spent the day in a daze, mechanically going through household tasks while her mind churned. She thought about Catherine Blackwood's elegant confidence, her substantial offer, her casual dismissal of Lydia as mere help. She thought about Samuel Hartwick's cold rejection, the doctor's clinical verdict, the shame that had driven her across 60 miles of desert to escape judgment. And she thought about Ethan, his quiet strength, his dry humor, his respect for her capabilities. The way he'd listened to her read poetry, argued with her about ranch management, shared his coffee and his silence. The way he'd said, "You're exactly who I need," with such conviction. As sunset approached, Lydia found herself on the porch where they'd shared so many evening conversations. The desert stretched before her, vast and unforgiving, but also beautiful in its harshness. She'd come to love this place over the past 2 months, its silence, its simplicity, its honest demands. She'd come to love the man who'd built his life here too, though she'd been too frightened to admit it even to herself. When Ethan rode in near dusk, leading Thunder to the barn, Lydia was waiting. He saw her on the porch, and his steps slowed, wariness crossing his features. "I've been thinking," she said as he approached. "That sounds dangerous." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "You were right earlier, about me still letting Samuel Hartwick define my worth, about me being too scared to see clearly." Ethan climbed the porch steps slowly. "And now? Now I'm trying to be brave enough to believe you actually mean what you said. That you genuinely don't care about children, that you see value in me beyond what society says makes a woman worthwhile." "I do mean it, Lydia. Every word." She studied his face in the fading light, searching for any hint of doubt or reservation. She found only steady certainty, and something else, something that looked very much like hope. "Then I have a question," she said. "When you said you wanted to build a life with me, what exactly did you mean? Because if you're offering me continued employment, I need to know that. But if you're offering something more—" She trailed off, her courage failing. "I'm offering something more." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm offering partnership. Real partnership. Not the business arrangement Catherine proposed, but something built on mutual respect and honest affection. I'm offering a future where we face this hard land together, where your strengths balance my weaknesses and vice versa. I'm offering—" He paused, searching for words. "I'm offering my heart, I suppose, though I'm clumsy at this and likely to make a mess of it." "I'm likely to make a mess of it too," Lydia whispered. "I've never had anyone value me the way you seem to. I don't know how to trust it." "Then we'll learn together. We'll make mistakes and figure it out as we go." He held out his hand. "What do you say, Lydia Harper? Will you take a chance on a solitary rancher who's terrible at expressing feelings but means every word?" She looked at his outstretched hand, rough from work, steady despite everything. This was the moment. The choice between safety and risk, between the familiar pain of believing herself worthless and the terrifying possibility that she might actually be enough exactly as she was. Lydia placed her hand in his. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll take that chance." Ethan's fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, and pulled her gently toward him. For a long moment, they simply stood there, hands clasped, looking at each other in the dying light. Then Ethan lifted his free hand to her face, his thumb brushing away the tear tracks on her cheek. "You're crying again. I seem to do that a lot around you. I've noticed. Should I be concerned?" No, these are different tiers. Good different or bad different? I'm still deciding. This time his smile was real, reaching his eyes and transforming his usually serious face into something approaching joy. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. Neither am I, Lydia said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. She wasn't running anymore. She was choosing to stay, to build, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was enough. They stood on the porch as darkness settled completely over the desert, neither quite willing to break the moment. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty she'd rarely heard from him. I should ride to Socorro tomorrow. Tell Catherine my decision. Do you want me to come with you? He considered this, then shook his head. Better if I handle it alone. She deserves a direct answer, not speculation about my reasons. He paused. Though I suspect she'll figure it out soon enough. She won't be pleased. No. But Catherine's a practical woman. She'll understand even if she doesn't approve. His hand tightened briefly around Lydia's. Will you be all right here alone for the day? I've been managing alone most of my life, Ethan. One more day won't hurt me. But when he rode out the next morning, Lydia found the ranch felt emptier than it ever had before. She threw herself into work, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, reorganizing cupboards that were already organized, kneading bread dough with more force than necessary. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling into doubt. What if Catherine convinced him otherwise? What if, away from Lydia's presence, he reconsidered the rashness of choosing a barren housekeeper over a wealthy widow with empire-building proposals? What if he realized that emotional declarations made at sunset didn't hold up to the practical realities of daylight? By the time she heard Thunder's hoofbeats late that afternoon, Lydia had worked herself into a state of anxious exhaustion. She met Ethan at the barn, searching his face for answers. It's done, he said simply, dismounting with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life on horseback. Catherine took it better than I expected, told me I was a fool, but wished me well anyway. Did you tell her about me? I told her I'd found what I needed here and wasn't interested in leaving it. He began unsaddling Thunder, his movements methodical. She's a shrewd woman. I think she understood without me spelling it out. Lydia helped him rub down the horse, the familiar rhythm of the work settling her nerves. Do you have any regrets? About turning down a fortune and social advancement to stay on an isolated ranch with a stubborn woman who burns biscuits? He glanced at her with that dry humor she'd come to cherish. Ask me again in 20 years. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. He finished with Thunder and turned to face her fully. Lydia, I can't promise you I'll never wonder what might have been, but I can promise you that I made this choice with clear eyes and no coercion. This is what I want. You're what I want. The declaration, simple and honest, melted the last of her anxiety. Then I suppose we should talk about what comes next. They did talk, long into the night over coffee at the kitchen table. Not about grand romantic gestures or passionate declarations, but about practical matters, how their partnership would work, what expectations they each had, how to navigate the social complexities of an unconventional arrangement. Marriage seems like the logical next step, Ethan said, his tone as businesslike as if he were discussing cattle prices, both for practical reasons and to avoid gossip that could make your life difficult. You're proposing? Lydia couldn't keep the amusement from her voice. This is possibly the least romantic proposal in history. I'm not a romantic man. You knew that when you agreed to stay. I did, though a little romance wouldn't kill you. He considered this seriously. Would you like me to get down on one knee? Compose poetry? I should warn you, my poetry will be significantly worse than Browning's. No, I think I prefer honest and practical to flowery and false. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Yes, Ethan, I'll marry you for practical reasons and to avoid gossip, and because, despite your complete lack of romantic sensibility, I find myself wanting a future with you. Good. But his eyes were warm, almost tender. We'll do it properly. Not a rushed affair like your first marriage. We'll take time, make it official, invite Doc Whitmore and whoever else you'd like present. I'd like Mrs. Chen there. And Maria. They were kind to me when I had no one. Then we'll invite them. Whatever you want, Lydia. This is your wedding too. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in Dr. Whitmore's parlor, with the doctor himself officiating and a small gathering of witnesses: Mrs. Chen, Maria, Tommy Reese and his family, and a few of Ethan's neighboring ranchers who'd made the journey out of curiosity as much as goodwill. Lydia wore a simple dress, Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Ethan wore his best shirt and actually combed his hair, though it was already falling back into disarray by the time the ceremony began. There were no grand pronouncements, no passionate vows. They spoke the traditional words with quiet sincerity, promised to honor and support each other, and sealed it with a brief, almost hesitant kiss that nevertheless sent warmth flooding through Lydia's chest. "Well," Dr. Whitmore said with a smile, "I must say this is the most practical wedding I've ever witnessed. May your marriage be blessed with the same good sense you've both shown today." Mrs. Chen pressed a package into Lydia's hands. "For your new life. You deserve happiness, child. You've earned it." The package contained fine bed linens, embroidered with careful stitches, a luxury Lydia would never have purchased for herself. She hugged the older woman, blinking back tears. "You cry at everything happy now," Mrs. Chen observed. "Is good change from crying at sad things." They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and if the designation felt strange at first, it also felt right in a way Lydia's brief first marriage never had. This was a partnership built on mutual respect and honest affection, not on social expectation or reproductive requirements. The first months of their marriage were an adjustment. Ethan was unused to sharing not just his space, but his life, his decisions, his vulnerabilities. He'd spent so many years alone that having someone present for every meal, every evening, every quiet moment felt both comforting and occasionally suffocating. But Lydia understood the need for solitude. Some afternoons she'd see him saddling Thunder and would simply say, "I'll have supper ready when you return," giving him permission to ride out alone without explanation or apology. And some evenings she'd retreat to the small room that was still hers, giving them both space to breathe. "This is unusual," Ethan observed one night when she emerged from her room after several hours of reading. "Most wives would object to separate sleeping quarters." "I'm not most wives." Lydia poured herself coffee. "And you're not most husbands. We're figuring out what works for us, not what's conventional." "You don't mind?" "Do you want me to mind?" He considered this with characteristic seriousness. "No, I like knowing you have your own space, that you're choosing to be here rather than feeling obligated by marriage vows." "Then I don't mind." She settled into the chair across from him. "Though I reserve the right to change this arrangement if and when it feels right to do so." "Fair enough." They developed routines that worked for them. Mornings were for work, Ethan with the cattle and horses, Lydia with the garden and household. Afternoons they often worked together, Lydia learning more about ranch management, while Ethan occasionally helped with tasks that required two people. Evenings were for conversation, reading, the comfortable silence that comes from genuine companionship. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the separate sleeping arrangements evolved. It started with Lydia falling asleep in the main room after a long day, Ethan carrying her to the bedroom they'd theoretically designated as his. Then with him joining her there one cold night when the fire had died and her small room was freezing. Eventually, the separate quarters became more symbolic than practical, a reminder that they each had autonomy even within the bonds of marriage. Winter brought its challenges. A harsh storm killed several head of cattle and damaged part of the barn roof. Lydia caught a fever that had Ethan riding through a blizzard to fetch Dr. Whitmore, his fear making him reckless in ways he'd never been for his own safety. The doctor's reassurance that it was merely influenza, not anything more serious, didn't stop Ethan from hovering anxiously until Lydia recovered. "You're being ridiculous," she told him on the third day, her voice hoarse but improving. "It's a common illness." "You were delirious yesterday, said things that made no sense." "What kind of things?" "You kept apologizing. To Samuel Hartwick, to your parents, to me. Saying you were sorry for being broken, for being worthless, for not being enough." His jaw was tight. "Even in fever, you carry that shame." Lydia looked away. "Old wounds heal slowly." "Maybe. But I need you to hear this while you're well enough to remember it." He moved to sit on the edge of the bed. You are not broken. You are not worthless. And you are more than enough, not just for me, but in general. Your worth isn't conditional on anything except your own existence. You sound like a philosopher. I sound like a man who's terrified of losing his wife and needs her to understand her value before it's too late. The raw honesty in his voice made her throat tight. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan. It's just a fever. This time. But someday it might not be just a fever, and I need to know that you'll fight to stay, that you believe you're worth fighting for. She reached for his hand. I'll fight. I promise. Spring brought renewal and new challenges. Word had spread about Ethan's marriage to his housekeeper, and opinions in Socorro were divided. Some viewed it as romantic, the wounded rancher and the woman who'd nursed him back to health. Others saw it as scandalous, a mail-order bride rejected by one man and taking up with another. The gossip might have remained just talk if it hadn't been for Martha Henderson, a rancher's wife who'd apparently decided to make Lydia's redemption her personal project. You poor dear, Martha said when she encountered Lydia at the mercantile. To have suffered such rejection and then to settle for, well, I'm sure you're doing the best you can. I'm not settling for anything, Mrs. Henderson. I'm very happy. Of course you are. And it's so brave of you to make the best of your unfortunate situation. Why, if I couldn't have children, I don't know what I'd do. Probably enter a convent or something useful like that. Lydia forced a smile. How fortunate for you that you don't have to make that choice. But the encounter left her shaken. She'd thought distance from Silver Springs meant distance from judgment, but apparently her story had followed her. On the ride home, she was quiet enough that Ethan noticed. Something happened in town? She told him about Martha Henderson, about the pitying looks and barely concealed contempt. I know I shouldn't let it bother me, but it does. Martha Henderson is a small-minded gossip who measures her own worth by tearing down others. Ethan's voice was hard. Her opinion means nothing. It means something when it reflects what most people think. Most people are fools. He pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her. Look at me, Lydia. Do you see pity in my eyes? Do you see someone who thinks you're settling or making the best of a bad situation? No. Then why does Martha Henderson's opinion matter more than mine? It doesn't. But she's not alone in thinking those things. The whole town probably. The whole town can think whatever it wants. We don't live for the town's approval. We live for ourselves, for each other, for the life we're building here. He cupped her face gently. I chose you, Lydia. Not because you were convenient or because I felt sorry for you, but because you're the strongest, most capable woman I've ever met. Because you make me laugh and challenge me and make this lonely place feel like home. That's the truth. Everything else is just noise. She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from his certainty. I love you. I don't think I've said that directly before. You haven't. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. But I knew anyway. How? Because you stayed. Because you argue with me when I'm wrong. Because you read terrible poetry with passion and burned biscuits with determination and faced down my demons without flinching. He smiled slightly. I love you too, in case that wasn't obvious. It wasn't. You're terrible at expressing emotions. Then I'll work on that. They did work on it, both of them learning to speak feelings that had been locked away for years. It wasn't easy. Both carried scars from pasts that had taught them to guard their hearts. But slowly, carefully, they built a language of affection between them that was uniquely theirs. Summer brought a different kind of challenge. The Reese family decided to move to California, leaving their ranch empty and their son Tommy heartbroken at leaving the only home he'd known. Over dinner one night, Tommy had mentioned to Ethan that his parents were selling everything, including his beloved mare. The boy's torn up about it, Ethan told Lydia that evening, asked if we might consider buying the mare so at least she'd have a good home. Did you tell him yes? I told him I'd think about it. He set down his coffee. But I'm considering something more substantial. Such as? The Reese Ranch borders ours to the east. If we bought it, we could expand our operation, run more cattle, have better grazing rotation. It would mean taking on debt, working twice as hard, probably hiring help, but it would also mean building something bigger, something lasting. Lydia studied him carefully. This isn't about Catherine Blackwood's offer, is it? You're not trying to prove you made the right choice by... No, this is about seeing an opportunity and having someone I trust to build it with. He reached across the table. I wouldn't consider this if I were alone. Too much risk, too much work. But with you managing the business side, keeping the books, handling the household, and eventually maybe the hired help, we could make this work. We could build something significant together. Together, Lydia repeated, testing the word. Equal partners? Equal partners. I make no major decisions without your input. You make none without mine. We succeed or fail together. It was, she realized, exactly what Catherine Blackwood had offered him. A partnership to build an empire. Except this partnership was built on love and mutual respect, not just business acumen. This partnership recognized her strengths and valued her contributions beyond her ability to bear children. Yes, she said, let's do it. Let's buy the Reese Ranch and build something lasting. The purchase went through by August, and with it came a whirlwind of activity. They hired 2 ranch hands, brothers from Texas who were skilled with cattle and grateful for steady work. Lydia organized the expansion with the same efficiency she'd brought to running the household, creating systems for tracking inventory, managing expenses, coordinating the doubled workload. They also made good on the promise to Tommy, buying his mare and arranging for him to visit whenever his family returned from California. The boy's tearful gratitude reminded Lydia that family could be built, not just born into. We're creating something here, she said to Ethan one evening, looking over the ledgers that showed their expanding operation. Not just a ranch, but a community of sorts. A small one, but yes. He glanced at her over his own paperwork. Does it feel like enough? Building this instead of other things? She understood what he wasn't saying. You're asking if I regret not having children. I suppose I am. Lydia set down her pen and considered the question honestly. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like. But I don't feel the absence the way I thought I would. I feel fulfilled by this, by our partnership, by the work we're doing, by the life we're building. Is that strange? No stranger than a man who never wanted to share his life with anyone, finding himself grateful every day that he shares it with you. That's almost romantic, Ethan Cole. Don't let it go to your head. I'm still terrible at this. You're getting better, though. As autumn approached and their first anniversary neared, Lydia found herself reflecting on the transformation of her life. A year ago, she'd been standing on a train platform in Socorro, alone and ashamed, certain she had nothing to offer the world. Now she was co-owner of an expanding ranch, wife to a man who valued her for herself, and part of a small but growing community that respected her capabilities. The anniversary itself came on a crisp October morning. Ethan surprised her by presenting a carefully wrapped package over breakfast. What's this? Open it and see. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the kind used for business records, but on the first page he'd written in his careful hand, "The partnership of Ethan and Lydia Cole, established October 15th, 1885. May our collaboration continue to bring prosperity, purpose, and peace to both parties involved." It's a business contract disguised as a romantic gesture, Lydia said, touched despite the practical nature of the gift. It's an acknowledgement that what we've built together matters, that your contributions to this ranch are equal to mine. He pointed to the empty pages that followed. I thought we could use it to track major decisions, to record our progress, to leave evidence that we did this together. She ran her fingers over the smooth leather, thinking about all the decisions society and Samuel Hartwick had excluded her from because of her supposed deficiency. Equal partners in all things. Equal partners, he confirmed, in business, in life, in everything that matters. That evening they rode out together to the highest point on their combined property, looking over land that stretched to the horizon in all directions. The sun was setting, painting the desert in impossible shades of orange and purple, and Lydia felt a sense of peace so profound it almost frightened her. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked. "That I was returned like defective merchandise and told I had no value, that I believed it for longer than I should have, and that somehow, impossibly, I ended up here with you, building something that matters more than anything I was supposed to want." "You were never defective, Lydia, just misunderstood by people too limited to see your actual worth." "And you saw it? From the beginning?" "From the moment you walked up to a panicked horse without fear, I saw someone extraordinary." Everything since has just confirmed that first impression. She leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders in a gesture that had become natural over the months of marriage. I love this life we've built. I love waking up knowing I'm valued for what I can do, not what I can't. I love working beside you and seeing the results of our partnership. I love… Me? He supplied, a hint of amusement in his voice. Don't fish for compliments. You know I love you. I do know, but I like hearing it anyway. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Two people who'd found in each other exactly what they'd needed, even if it wasn't what society said they should want. Ethan had never wanted children, never needed heirs or legacy in the traditional sense. What he'd wanted was honest partnership, mutual respect, someone who could share the burden and joy of building a life in harsh country. And Lydia had needed someone who could see past society's narrow definition of a woman's worth, who valued her mind and capabilities as much as, or more than, traditional feminine contributions, who proved through actions, not just words, that she was enough exactly as she was. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For choosing me. For seeing me. For building this life where I can be myself without shame or limitation. Thank you for staying, for taking the risk, for believing me when I said children were never why I wanted you. Cut. And in that moment, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky above their land, their ranch, their home, Lydia finally released the last traces of shame Samuel Hartwick had branded into her soul. She was not broken. She was not less than. She was Lydia Cole, equal partner in a thriving ranch, beloved wife of a man who'd chosen her deliberately and completely. She was at long last exactly enough, she thought. The years that followed their first anniversary brought both triumph and trial, each season layering new experiences onto the foundation they'd built together. The ranch prospered beyond even Ethan's practical expectations. Their herd grew from 50 head of cattle to nearly 200. The two hired hands became 4, then 6, each man carefully chosen for his work ethic and character rather than just his skill with cattle. Lydia managed it all with the same quiet efficiency she'd brought to stopping a panicked horse and assisting in surgery, seeing what needed doing and doing it without fanfare or complaint. But prosperity brought visibility, and visibility brought complications. It was their third spring together when Samuel Hartwick appeared at their ranch, riding up the long drive in a fancy buggy that spoke of wealth and pretension. Lydia saw him from the garden where she was planting beans, and her entire body went cold despite the warm sunshine. Lydia? Ethan's voice came from behind her. He'd been mending fence in the near pasture and must have seen the buggy approaching. You all right? That's Samuel Hartwick. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. My first husband. Ethan's expression hardened into something dangerous. Want me to send him away? No, I want to face him. She stood, brushing dirt from her work dress, a far cry from the fine traveling clothes she'd worn to Silver Springs 3 years ago, but infinitely more honest. I want him to see what his rejection led to. Samuel climbed down from his buggy, his face showing surprise when he recognized her. He'd aged poorly in 3 years, his hairline receding, his waistline expanding, his expression carrying a perpetual sourness that hadn't been there before. Lydia Harper, he said, then corrected himself. Or is it something else now? Lydia Cole. This is my husband, Ethan Cole. She moved to stand beside Ethan, who'd positioned himself protectively close. What brings you to our ranch, Mr. Hartwick? Business, actually. I'm looking to expand my holdings and heard the Cole Ranch might be interested in selling some grazing rights. His eyes traveled over their property with calculation. Didn't realize the Cole in question was married to my former wife. Then you've wasted a trip, Ethan said flatly. We're not selling anything, not to you or anyone else. Samuel's lips thinned. You might reconsider when you hear my offer. I'm prepared to pay substantially above market value for access to your water rights along the eastern boundary. No amount of money would make me consider doing business with a man who treated my wife the way you did. I treated her according to the terms of our agreement. She failed to meet the most basic requirement of a wife. Lydia felt Ethan tense beside her, but spoke before he could. I met every requirement that mattered. I was honest, hardworking, educated, and willing to build a life with you. The only requirement I failed was one I had no control over, and one you decided was more important than every other quality I possessed. Children are the foundation of marriage. Any reasonable person understands that. Children are one possible aspect of some marriages, Lydia corrected, not the foundation of all of them. My marriage to Ethan has thrived without them. Samuel's laugh was ugly. Thrived? You're living on an isolated ranch doing manual labor. This is what you call thriving? Compared to living with a man who saw me as breeding stock rather than a human being? Yes, Mr. Hartwick, this is thriving. She gestured toward their land, their home, the life they'd built. I own this ranch jointly with my husband. I manage our accounts, our employees, our business decisions. I'm respected, valued, and loved for who I am, not what my body can or cannot do. So, yes, I'd say I'm thriving considerably better than I would have in Silver Springs as your wife. Ethan's hand found hers, squeezing gently in silent support. Samuel's face had gone red. You always were too opinionated for your own good. I did you a favor sending you away. No man wants a wife who thinks she's his equal. Then it's fortunate I found a man who knows I'm his equal, Lydia said quietly. Now I believe we've concluded our business, Mr. Hartwick. Our answer is no. It will remain no regardless of your offer. Please leave our property. For a moment, Samuel looked like he might argue. Then his eyes shifted to Ethan's face, saw whatever expression Ethan was wearing, and apparently thought better of it. He climbed back into his buggy with wounded dignity. You'll regret this stubbornness, he called as he turned the horses. Both of you. They watched him drive away in silence. Only when the buggy disappeared over the rise did Lydia allow herself to tremble. Ethan pulled her against him immediately. You were magnificent, he said into her hair. Absolutely magnificent. I was terrified. Couldn't tell. You faced him down like a warrior. I had good reason to. He couldn't be allowed to think he'd broken me. She pulled back to look at Ethan's face. Did you mean what you said? About me being your equal? I've meant it since the day we married. Before that even. His hands framed her face. You are my equal in every way that matters, Lydia. My partner, my match, the other half of everything we've built. Don't ever doubt that. The encounter with Samuel, difficult as it was, marked a turning point for Lydia. Facing the man who'd rejected her and standing her ground against his judgment freed something that had remained locked in her chest. She'd proven to herself, and to him, that his verdict hadn't destroyed her. If anything, his rejection had redirected her toward a life far better than anything she could have had in Silver Springs. That summer brought another unexpected visitor, though this one was considerably more welcome. Dr. Whitmore arrived with a young woman in tow, perhaps 19, visibly pregnant, and wearing the haunted expression Lydia recognized from her own mirror 3 years earlier. This is Sarah Mitchell, Dr. Whitmore said after the initial greetings. She's in a difficult situation, and I thought perhaps you and Ethan might be able to help. Over coffee, Sarah's story emerged haltingly. She'd been seduced by a rancher's son who'd promised marriage, then abandoned her when she became pregnant. Her family had disowned her. The father's family denied everything. She had no money, no prospects, and a baby coming in 3 months. I can't pay you, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. But Dr. Whitmore thought maybe you might need help around the house, and I'm willing to work hard. I can cook and clean, and we do need help, Lydia interrupted gently. With the ranch expanding, I've been struggling to manage both the household and the business side of things. If you're willing to assist with cooking and general housekeeping, we can provide room, board, and wages. After the baby comes, we can reassess the arrangement based on what works for everyone. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. You'd take me in? Even knowing? Especially knowing, Lydia said firmly. You're not the first woman to be betrayed by a man's false promises, and you won't be the last, but you deserve better than being cast out for his failures. Ethan had remained silent throughout the conversation, but now he spoke up. We have that small cabin near the creek. It was built for the previous owner's mother. It's been empty for years, but it's sound. We could fix it up, make it comfortable for you and the baby, give you privacy and independence. Why would you do this for me? Sarah's voice broke. You don't even know me. Lydia and Ethan exchanged glances, a full conversation passing between them in that look. Then Lydia said, "Because someone once gave me a chance when I desperately needed one. Because society's judgments are often cruel and frequently wrong. And because we can. That's reason enough." Sarah moved into the creek cabin 2 weeks later, and slowly her haunted expression began to ease. She proved to be an excellent cook and kept the main house cleaner than Lydia ever had time to manage. More importantly, she began to smile again, to participate in dinner conversations, to show glimpses of the person she'd been before shame had bowed her shoulders. When her labor came in September, Lydia stayed with her through the long night, holding her hand and offering encouragement while Dr. Whitmore managed the medical aspects. Dawn broke just as Sarah's daughter entered the world, a healthy, squalling infant with her mother's dark eyes. "She's perfect," Sarah whispered, holding her baby with wonder and fierce protectiveness. "Absolutely perfect." "She is," Lydia agreed, something bittersweet stirring in her chest. She would never hold her own child like this, would never experience the particular joy and terror of new motherhood. But watching Sarah's face transform with love, she found she could be genuinely happy for her without drowning in her own loss. Later, when she and Ethan were alone, he asked quietly, "Are you all right?" That couldn't have been easy. It was beautiful and hard and worthwhile all at once. She leaned against him. "I won't lie and say there wasn't a moment of grief for what I can't have, but mostly I felt privileged to be there, to help bring that little life into the world safely. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." He kissed her temple. "You're going to be important in that child's life, you know. An aunt of sorts." "I hope so, though Sarah may decide to move on once she's recovered and saved some money." But Sarah didn't move on. She stayed through that winter and the next, raising her daughter Emma in the creek cabin while working for the Coles and becoming something more than an employee. She became family in the way that mattered, chosen, not blood. Emma's first steps were taken in the main house kitchen. Her first words included Aunt Lydia and Uncle Ethan. And when Sarah eventually married one of their ranch hands, a quiet, steady man who accepted both her and her daughter without judgment, the wedding took place on the ranch with Lydia and Ethan standing as witnesses. "We're creating something here," Lydia observed to Ethan that night. "A kind of family that doesn't fit society's mold but works beautifully anyway." "A refuge for the rejected and judged," Ethan agreed. "Seems fitting, given how we both started out." The ranch's reputation grew in unexpected ways. Word spread that the Coles were fair employers who didn't pry into people's pasts, and they found themselves attracting workers others had dismissed or overlooked. A former soldier struggling with memories of war. A widow with 3 children and no prospects. A young man who stuttered so badly, most employers wouldn't hire him, despite his gift with horses. Each found a place at the Cole Ranch, and each contributed to its success in ways that transcended simple economic exchange. But success brought scrutiny, and scrutiny eventually brought confrontation. It was their 5th year of marriage when Martha Henderson organized what she termed a women's charitable society with the stated mission of bringing moral guidance to the territory. In practice, it seemed designed primarily to judge and condemn anyone who didn't conform to Martha's narrow vision of propriety. The society's first official act was to pay a visit to the Cole Ranch, ostensibly to assess the moral character of the household, given that they employed an unwed mother and other questionable individuals. Lydia met them on the porch, Martha and 4 other women from Socorro, all dressed in their finest clothes and carrying themselves with self-righteous authority. She did not invite them inside. "Mrs. Cole," Martha began, her smile tight and false, "we've come to discuss some concerns about the nature of your household." "Have you?" Lydia's voice was flat. "It's come to our attention that you harbor an unwed mother and her illegitimate child on your property. We feel this sends a poor message to the community about acceptable moral standards." Sarah Mitchell is employed as our housekeeper and lives in a separate cabin with her daughter. Her employment is based on her excellent work, not her marital status. "But surely you must see how this appears. A woman of loose morals, raising a bastard child." "Stop!" Lydia's voice cracked like a whip. "You will not use such language about Sarah or Emma on my property. Sarah is a woman who was betrayed by a man's false promises and abandoned by a society that blamed her for his sins. The true moral failing here is not hers." Mrs. Cole, we're simply concerned about the influence such arrangements might have. There are standards we must maintain. Standards like judging a woman's worth by her ability to bear children within marriage. Standards like treating human beings as defective if they don't conform to narrow expectations. I'm quite familiar with those standards, Mrs. Henderson. They're the same ones that declared me worthless 3 years ago. The visiting women exchanged uncomfortable glances. I know you all know my history, Lydia continued, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. You know I was returned like damaged goods by my first husband because I cannot have children. You know I came to Socorro with nothing but shame and desperation. And you know that despite society's verdict on my worth, I've built a successful life here with a man who values me for myself, not my reproductive capacity. That's different, Martha protested weakly. You're married now, respectably settled. I'm exactly what I was 3 years ago, a barren woman whose society deemed useless. The only difference is that I found someone who saw past that judgment to my actual worth. Sarah deserves the same chance. So does every person working on this ranch who's been dismissed or rejected elsewhere. She stepped forward, and the women instinctively stepped back. This ranch is a place where people are valued for their character and capabilities, not their conformity to your standards. If that offends your delicate moral sensibilities, I suggest you leave and don't return. We have work to do, and your judgment is neither requested nor welcome. Martha drew herself up. The community will hear about this. You'll be ostracized. The community can do as it pleases. We don't need Socorro's approval to succeed. Good day, ladies. She turned and walked into the house, closing the door firmly behind her. Her hands were shaking, adrenaline flooding her system, but she'd meant every word. Ethan found her in the kitchen a few minutes later. He'd been working in the barn and apparently witnessed the confrontation from a distance. I heard raised voices. Thought I should stay out of it unless you needed backup. I handled it. I noticed. Also noticed you basically declared war on Socorro's social establishment. Lydia laughed shakily. I suppose I did. Does that concern you? Not even slightly. I'm just impressed you did it without setting anything on fire. He pulled her into an embrace. I'm proud of you, Lydia. Standing up for Sarah, for yourself, for everyone we've given a chance to. That took courage. Or stupidity. Martha wasn't bluffing about social consequences. Let them come. We built something here that doesn't depend on their approval. We'll weather whatever they throw at us. The social consequences did come, but they were less severe than feared. Some families stopped trading with them, but others, those who'd also felt the sting of society's harsh judgments, actively sought them out. Their ranch became known as a place of refuge and second chances, and while Martha Henderson's charitable society muttered disapprovingly, they couldn't deny the Cole Ranch's prosperity or the loyalty of its workers. More importantly, the confrontation freed Lydia from the last traces of caring what people like Martha thought. She'd stood her ground, defended her choices, and discovered that society's disapproval couldn't actually hurt her anymore. She had Ethan, had the ranch, had the family they'd chosen to build. That was more than enough. The years continued to pass with the rhythm of ranch life, brutal winters and scorching summers, good years and lean ones, challenges met and overcome through partnership and determination. They weathered drought, cattle disease, market fluctuations, and the occasional rustler. Through it all, Lydia and Ethan remained constant partners, their respect and affection deepening with each shared trial. It was their 10th anniversary when Ethan surprised her with a gift that made her weep. They'd ridden out to their favorite spot, the high point overlooking their combined properties, and he'd pulled a large envelope from his saddlebag. What's this? Open it. Inside was a deed, officially recorded and legally binding. It renamed their holdings the Cole Partnership Ranch and designated Lydia as equal owner with all rights and responsibilities that entailed. Below the legal language, Ethan had written in his own hand, established by Ethan and Lydia Cole as equal partners in all endeavors. May our collaboration continue to bring prosperity, purpose, and peace to both parties and to all who seek refuge here. I know we've always treated it as a partnership, Ethan said quietly. But I wanted it official, legal, undeniable. You built this with me, Lydia. Half of everything here is yours by right, not just by marriage. She couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. 10 years ago, she'd been standing on a train platform with nothing but shame and $3 to her name. Now she held legal title to a thriving ranch, was respected as an equal partner, had created a home and family that defied convention but worked beautifully. "Thank you," she finally managed, "for seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life where I could become who I was meant to be. Thank you for being brave enough to believe me when I said children were never why I wanted you, for staying despite your fear, for becoming my partner in every sense of the word." They stood together watching the sun set over their land, their ranch, their legacy. Below them, they could see Sarah's cabin with smoke rising from the chimney. She and her husband had just welcomed a second child, a son named Thomas, who already showed signs of his father's quiet steadiness. They could see the bunkhouse where their 6 ranch hands lived, men who'd found purpose and dignity working land they helped steward. They could see the main house where Lydia and Ethan had learned to build a marriage based on mutual respect rather than societal expectation. "Do you ever regret it?" Lydia asked quietly. "Choosing this life instead of what Catherine Blackwood offered?" "Not once. Not for a single moment." Ethan pulled her closer. "She could have given me wealth and expansion and social standing. You gave me peace, partnership, and a life worth living. There's no comparison." "Even without children? Without heirs to pass this on to?" "We have heirs, just not biological ones. Emma already follows you around learning ranch management. Thomas will probably do the same with me when he's older. And whoever comes next, because there will be others who need refuge, they'll carry on what we've built here. Legacy isn't just about blood, Lydia. It's about values, about creating something that matters and passing it forward." She thought about this, about how their ranch had become a place where the rejected and judged could find new purpose, about how Sarah's children would grow up knowing that worth came from character, not conformity, about how the men working their land had learned that past mistakes didn't define future possibilities. "We've built something good here," she said. "We have. And we're not done yet." They weren't. More years followed, each bringing new challenges and triumphs. They expanded again, buying another neighboring property when the owner retired. They established a proper school on the ranch, hiring a teacher and opening it to children from surrounding properties, ensuring the next generation had opportunities they'd lacked. They weathered the economic panic of 1893 by supporting their workers through the crisis, an investment in people that repaid itself tenfold in loyalty and dedication. And through it all, Lydia and Ethan remained partners in the truest sense, challenging each other, supporting each other, growing together rather than apart. Their marriage became the kind of relationship others aspired to, built on honesty and respect rather than romantic illusion. On their 20th anniversary, they threw a celebration at the ranch, not just for themselves, but for everyone who'd been part of their journey. Sarah and her family, their ranch hands, some of whom had been with them for a decade or more. Dr. Whitmore, now nearly 70, but still practicing. Mrs. Chen, whose boarding house had been Lydia's first refuge. Maria from Dr. Whitmore's office. Even Tommy Reese, now a grown man with his own ranch in California, made the journey back for the occasion. The party stretched from afternoon into evening, filled with food and laughter and the kind of easy camaraderie that comes from shared purpose and mutual respect. As the sun set, Ethan stood to make a toast. 20 years ago, I was a solitary man who'd convinced himself he didn't need anyone. I was wrong. My wife, he looked at Lydia with unmistakable affection, proved that partnership makes everything better. Work, challenges, victories, even the quiet moments. She took a chance on a wounded stranger who wasn't good at expressing feelings, and built a life with him anyway. I'm grateful every day that she was brave enough to stay. Lydia stood beside him, squeezing his hand. And I'm grateful he was honest enough to see past society's judgments to who I actually was. To tell me that children were never why he wanted me, and to prove it through 20 years of partnership and respect. We didn't build a conventional family, but we built something real and lasting. We built home. The gathered crowd raised their glasses, and in that moment, Lydia felt the absolute completeness of her transformation. The broken, rejected woman who'd stepped off a train in Socorro had become someone confident, capable, and certain of her worth. The shame Samuel Hartwick had branded into her soul had been replaced by pride in genuine accomplishment and relationships built on truth rather than pretense. She was Lydia Cole, equal partner in a thriving ranch, beloved wife of a good man, mentor to the next generation, refuge provider for those who needed second chances. She was exactly enough, exactly as she was. Later, when the guests had departed and she and Ethan sat alone on their porch, as they'd done countless times before, he said quietly, "Any regrets? Anything you'd change if you could go back?" Lydia considered this seriously. "I regret the pain I experienced, the shame, the fear, the belief that I was worthless. But I can't regret the path that led me here because this life, our life, is better than anything I could have imagined in my darkest moments on that train platform. No regrets about children? Sadness sometimes, when I think about what might have been. But not regret. We've built a different kind of family, and it's been enough, more than enough." "Good." He was quiet for a moment. "Because you've been more than enough for me, Lydia. Not despite your inability to have children, but because of who you are. Strong, smart, brave, stubborn, capable of seeing worth in people others have dismissed. You've made my life richer in every way that matters." "Children were never why you wanted me," she said softly, echoing the words that had changed everything 20 years ago. "Never. Not for a single moment." He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge over land they'd built together. The desert stretched before them, harsh and beautiful, full of challenges and possibilities. They'd faced it together for 2 decades and would face whatever came next the same way, as partners, as equals, as two people who'd found in each other exactly what they needed, even if it wasn't what society said they should want. And in the end, that was the truest legacy they could leave. Proof that worth came from character, that family could be chosen, and that the deepest fulfillment came from building a life based on honesty and mutual respect rather than conforming to others' expectations. Lydia Cole had been returned for being barren, told she was broken and worthless. But she'd refused to accept that verdict. She'd found a man who saw her actual value, built a partnership that defied convention, and created a home where the rejected and judged could find new purpose. She'd been told she wasn't enough. She'd proven them all wrong. And as she sat beside her husband under the vast New Mexico sky, surrounded by the legacy they'd built together, Lydia knew with absolute certainty that she'd found something far better than the life Samuel Hartwick's rejection had cost her. She'd found herself. She'd found home. She'd found a love that valued her for exactly who she was. And that, in the end, was everything.